program webinar. My name is William Lusk, and I am from OCEANS, standing for Ocean County Engineering and Applied Nautical Services. I will be today's facilitator and moderator, and once we get rid of a few housekeeping items, we will sink our teeth right into the main substance of today's presentation. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll try to keep this information to about 45 minutes with about 15 minutes for some question and answers, which anytime you're dealing with federal grants, I'm sure that we'll be receiving a lot of very good questions to follow. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I am a program and project manager for OCEANS, LLC. I have extensive background with maritime and port security. I'm a member of the Caribbean Shipping Association Security Advisory Council, a board member of the Propeller Club of Jacksonville, written several port security and homeland security grants in the past. And a little bit about OCEANS. Essentially, we do government contract work. Our main client is the United States Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate, but our main role is non-biased consultation. We don't have any preferred agreements with any technology or tool manufacturers of any type in the support of government and commercial clients. And my role as facilitator for today, we're going to be muting everybody's microphones, and if there are any questions that we encounter along the way, please feel free to use the chat function on your computer screens and search for me, William Lusk, and feel free to type in any questions or if you have any clarification, and that way I can either stop the presenter and we can go back, or we can address those during the Q&A section. So it should be very straightforward. And for those calling in and not using computers, please bear with us until the Q&A section, at which point we can unmute some microphones and address some questions for our call-in participants today. So our agenda will start off with the introduction and background of today's speakers, and we're going to dive into what we know about the Port Security Grant Program before the Notice of Funding Opportunity is released in a couple weeks. We will be discussing how to prepare and increase your chance of a successful application, which is very critical, post-award considerations, other things to think about, and then we will have time for questions and wrap up before 1 o'clock. Before 3 o'clock. So Mark DuPont is our first presenter, the Executive Director of the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy. And Mark, if you can introduce yourself and say a little background about yourself, and we can get going.
Sure. But as I look at some of the people signing in, there's some old friends there. So if I go into my entire background, we won't have enough time to talk about port security grants. So yes, currently I am the the Executive Director of the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy. Prior to that, some of you may know me from my life with the National Association of State Boating Law Administrators, where I was the Director of Boat Operations and Training. And then prior to that, I was the Chief Intelligence and Domestic Security Officer for the state of Florida. And then, of course, my Coast Guard career, where I see some friends in chat talking about that career just by mentioning that they want to take presentation controls over. So the Academy, I'm not going to read all these bullet points here, but just know that we've been around for 18 years now, formed by a retired Coast Guard Commandant. We're a nonprofit, member-driven organization, and our focus is providing subject matter expertise on technologies, on security measures, on enhancement of the deck plate level's ability to do their mission in the port security realm and in the law enforcement realm. We do this through needs assessments, tailored customization of training and exercises, utilizing national best practices. And ultimately, we try to fulfill our mantra, which is strength through knowledge. So let's just get right into this. The Port Security Grant for 2018, what do we know and what do we not know? Well, the most important questions I'm sure everybody's asking right this moment is the when and what. The when with regard to when will this be released. In our conversations with people within the Beltway that are in charge of this program, it's likely to occur before the end of next month. It's likely to have a short window, just like it did last year. If you remember, if you were in the application process last year, it was only 20 days we had from the NOFO announcement to the deadline. And there's a lot of moving parts, as I'm sure many of you can attest who've been through this process. So recognizing that that window may be short is important to our discussion today. We'll talk a little bit about what you can kind of preload and get ready for so that when the announcement is made, you're pretty much ready to hit send on your application. The budget that was approved was $100 million. Now, the key part of this is that it was approved in the budget and it's not part of a continuing resolution. The reason that that's important in this discussion is that when it was under the continuing resolution and part of the sequestration rules and requirements, the federal government had to spend that money and could not alter it in any way. When it becomes part of the budget, the White House does have control over how much is allocated, even though the budget says $100 million. And I say that because if the president determines that there's another project that he wants to take some money from one thing or another to pay for that project, it could come from this particular program. And there have been those types of discussions inside the Beltway regarding that. We don't think it will happen, but just be aware of that. So if you see that NOFO and all of a sudden it does not say 100 million on it, you'll understand why and how that was able to occur. Moving on. So what for? What will be the things that are most likely going to be on that list of priorities? We don't see a lot of things changing. The typical or usual suspects, maritime domain awareness, port resilience, training and exercise, cybersecurity capabilities, CBRN, IED, all those things will most likely still be there. What we want to talk about today, at least what I want to share with you, is a couple of insights as it relates to training and exercises and cybersecurity capabilities. So some key things to think about with regard to training. So question, we'll see how many ninjas I have in the audience here, but over the last 15 years, what would you think the total amount of funding, port security grant funding, has been allocated to training over the last 15 years? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Just type it in chat, and I'll get to it in a second and give that answer. There's a reason why DHS and FEMA wants to focus on training this year. The existing tools that are in place that were purchased over the last 10 to 15 years are in place, but in many places not being used. So part of that is because there's been a loss of institutional knowledge. And I see some answers coming in on chat. The total number over the last 15 years has never been over 5% of the total money that's been afforded to the Port Security Grant Program. So DHS and FEMA are looking at this and saying, how can we energize this and make people pay a little bit more attention to the training element, especially when you consider the fact that there might not be that institutional knowledge there. And by the way, not to get off track, but we looked at this from an academy perspective in a white paper that we wrote called Navigating the Changing Seascape of Maritime Public Safety. You can click on that link and you'll be able to access that white paper. But that institutional knowledge, especially as it relates to maritime law enforcement and the maritime domain in totality, the millennial population occupies about 40% of the total workforce in the United States. In the maritime domain, it's actually higher than that. It's actually closer to 70%. So the people that know how to use this equipment have left, especially if it's technology-driven resource that you've acquired through your Port Security Grant Program. So when you consider that, what type of training can you ask for? Well, of course, the FEMA-approved courses are top on the list, but you can also apply for customized or tailored solutions that are unique to your port, your organization, your department, your division. You can customize a solution that might not be on the FEMA approved list, and how you get that achieved, which Rob will talk about in a few minutes, is in the narrative and how you articulate why you need this particular training. Ultimately, if you've chosen something as the authority having jurisdiction and you want that particular type of training, you can get it. So the key point is think outside the box. Some keys about cybersecurity. Well, everybody knows the Maersk event that happened last year. And if you don't, just Google it and you'll see the news about it, and you'll see how much that cost Maersk. They spent about $350 million in recovery, and part of that recovery was in putting in patches to over 40,000 devices that they have as an organization that have a digital footprint or can connect to the outside world. And what I like to illustrate is, remember the touch points of the maritime transportation security system, especially if you are a maritime entity, whether you're a shipping company, whether you're a cruise company, whether you're a terminal operator, whether you're a port authority. Just think for a moment about what all the touch points are in your organization. And that's an illustration of how that can affect you, is what happened with Maersk. Interestingly enough, they put in some great security measures. They patched and put some defense mechanisms on all those devices. However, they were attacked yet again last month through a towing company that they own in Australia. So again, you can Google that and learn more about it. We try to illustrate that point in the white paper that we wrote called No Safe Harbors. You can read that white paper or you can listen to that webcast. The point about cybersecurity is focusing on becoming proactive versus reactive. And to do that, you have to look at it from a cyber risk management perspective. What's the situational analysis and awareness capabilities that you have? And where are you in your maturity? This can begin with a needs assessment, by the way, just taking a snapshot of where you are in your organization and how that affects your enterprise, how that affects the port that you operate in, how that affects your organization from a people perspective. And it gives you just a score, if you will, on your cybersecurity maturity level. The other thing that you can think of, and we're doing this with working on a project potentially with the Port of Virginia, can be an annual penetration test of your systems, including physical access. Can people get access to your IT systems physically? Can they get it from external of your organization? Can they get it through a third party? These are all things to consider about cybersecurity. We won't spend a whole lot of time on it. This could be a webinar all to itself. But interestingly enough, in everything I just talked about, you've pretty much outlined what could be your investment justification. Those are the elements that you would articulate in your narrative about why you wanted to invest in a specific resource to enhance your cybersecurity. So next question, who's going to get it? Who's going to get the money? This is the $100 million question, right? How does that get allocated? Who has a chance of getting it? And Rob's going to get into more detail about that, but preparation is the key. And we can't emphasize that enough. It's why we wanted to hold this webinar early before this NOFO comes out. We want to make sure that you can do all the things you can up front to prepare yourself and increase your likelihood of securing that. So the point is, it's who's going to get it? Those who begin that preparation process now, those who begin putting their package together. And I like to say, preparation plus your story that you're going to tell, your narrative, plus your documentation, which Rob is going to go over here in a couple of seconds, and plus some good guidance from subject matter experts in the particular area that you're looking at will equal your success and increase your opportunity. The process, I think everybody on this call kind of knows the process. You're going to submit your application at the local captain of the port level, going a little too fast here. And the captain of the port is going to score that, and it's going to go up to the district, onto the area, and on the headquarters. And ultimately, a committee is going to assemble and decide who gets the grants based on the allocation and based on the scoring that was provided. Rob will talk a little bit more about the scoring. We want to give it your best chance, but there are other variables that may intercede and change those variables. We'll talk about that in a second. So what's important in the process? Your Area Maritime Security Committee. I tell people this all the time. If the first time that you submit your application or the first time that you meet or work with your Area Maritime Security Committee is when you're submitting your application, you're already behind the curve. Now, that's not insurmountable. If that is the circumstances, then there's ways to overcome that, but it definitely sets you at a disadvantage. The other thing is, if you're looking for something that's just for you, then you're reducing your chance of success. If you're looking for something for you that has a regional application and is a benefit to the region, to the entire port area, then that increases your chance. You'll hear us say it again, the story, how you tell the story about why this is important to your port, to your particular area, and to you as an entity is an important aspect. A needs assessment, make sure that you are doing a good assessment of why this is a particular need. In other words, if you just say this is a need and you don't have any type of documentation to support that, to identify why this is a need, then you're at a disadvantage. How do you do that? Well, you can conduct a needs assessment. You can do some sort of gap analysis. But you can also look at things that might already have been done. If you have conducted an exercise, which pretty much everybody does and is required to do, and there are after action report elements of that exercise that identify potential gaps, then you want to reference that. The more you reference something that's actually occurred that can be a measurement of your preparedness or your readiness and identify that gap or that need, the higher your chances of getting this approved at a higher level. The other thing you could look at, or should look at, not could, I strongly recommend that you somehow tie this to your state's Homeland Security THIRA report. Every state is required to do it. It's their threats and hazards identification, and the process requires you to identify what those threats are, identify what that risk is, and then identify what things you can do to mitigate that risk. So anytime you can tie your grant application to your state Homeland Security THIRA, the better you are. So let's talk a little bit about the application process. This is where I'm going to turn it over to Rob LeClaire. Rob is the Vice President of Moran Office of Maritime and Port Security. He has over 30 years of experience in maritime and international shipping. He's currently managing 21 port security grant projects in the 2016-2017 cycle, awarded in ports all across the country. Without any further ado, Rob, you have control.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Will, and thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar on this very important program, which gives us an opportunity to take advantage of some government funds, upgrade our facilities and ports, which obviously is extremely important. We believe the program still needs additional funding. Originally, it was a $400 million program. It's been cut down to $100 million, but there are a lot of active participants in the maritime realm who are pushing hard to get that funding increased over the years, the coming years, and we hope that we see that. So a little bit about the Moran Office of Maritime and Port Security. We are a division of Moran Shipping Agencies. We've been in business since 1937. We are the largest steamship agency in the United States. We formed our Maritime and Port Security Division over 10 years ago. We've been involved in pretty much every aspect of maritime and port security, conducting vessel and facility security audits, drills and exercises, FSP plan writing, a lot of analytical work. We do a lot of maritime guard work. We operate pretty much in every port in the United States. We've also done some ISPS compliance work overseas in conjunction with the NMLEA over in Africa. They've been a very good partner of ours over the years, and we're looking forward to expanding that relationship as we go forward. Okay, here we go. So regarding the process for the grant applications. Some of you who have already participated in this will know that this is. I mean, you already have this information, but believe it or not, there are companies that come to us the day before the application is due and ask us what a DUNS number is or how they participate in the program. So for those who are not familiar with the application process, my first suggestion would be to go to grants.gov and register. You will have to have a DUNS number for your company and an EIN number, which I'm assuming most have. But if you don't have a DUNS number, not everyone participates in DUNS. It is required to register in what they call SAM, the System of Award Management. You'll also, when you register in SAM, you'll be able to put in your bank account information in there so that at some point, if you are awarded a grant, you'll be able to draw down on those funds. The 2017 NOFO, which is accessible, there's a link that you'll be able to access it. I would implore everyone to read that. There are excellent instructions in there on the complete process of not only preparing for the application, but also there's an Appendix F at the end of the NOFO, which gives some excellent tips on things that you should include in your complete package, including your investment justification. So what types of things besides going through the initial registration process do you need to be thinking about? Obviously, you want to identify what your needs are based upon your vulnerabilities at your facility or your port. And those you'll find hopefully in your facility security plan and in the annual audits that you conduct and your quarterly drills and annual exercises. Those are important because those are the things that in the review process will be looked at very closely to determine whether or not you are not only eligible for an award, but whether you deserve an award. Okay. This thing's moving a little slowly, so I'm clicking here. Okay, you want to obviously know your captain of the port's priorities, and we'll go over that in a little bit later slide. You want to prioritize your wish list. I've seen clients who have come to us with a wish list that is a mile long, asking for things that are on the what they call the AEL, the authorized equipment list, but unfortunately they'll have no chance of getting it. So you don't want to tie up your resources, or if you're using an external grant writer, you don't want to waste their time or your time putting together items for things that really make no sense for you in your particular situation. So make sure that the investment justifications that you're submitting are practical and that they make sense for your particular company and in your particular port area. I'll give you a brief example. We had a client recently over the last couple of years who was asking for a seaburn boat in a very high-risk port area, and that application did not get past step one because everyone in that vicinity has a seaburn boat. So it was not. It was a waste of time and resources on both our parts. But they wanted me to write the grant and the investment justification, and I did. But so make sure you understand that there are some things that you need to know what your neighbors have also, so that you're able to eliminate some of the items that may be on your wish list. Very important, you want to obtain accurate quotes from your vendors. We've seen a lot of estimates come in where companies just estimate their own costs, what they project something might cost, let's say for a generator or for even a full TWIC reader installation or a multi-TWIC reader installation at the facility without going to a systems integrator. The problem that you run into later on is you're either underfunded or you may have too much money to spend, and that could be an issue also. Cost match. This is obviously very important. You know, the program last year was a 25% cost match. We're hearing that this year for private companies that the cost match could be 50%. Mark, you may be able to elaborate a little bit more on that. You've been a little closer to that those discussions than I have, but either way, whether it's 25 or 50%, you know, we've seen companies in the past that have gotten awards and could not match the 25% for whatever reason, or the CFO or the CEO did not realize that there was a 25% cost match, and it was a significant award, and they did not want to spend those funds, or from the time that they received the award till the time that they were actually able to implement it, the financial conditions of the company changed. So you want to make sure that you're able to make that 25% commitment, and because the last thing you want to do is give money back. And one thing that you also want to be aware of is that your M&A, your management administrative expenses, must not exceed 5% of the total award. So when you fill out your budget detail worksheets, make sure that does not exceed 5%. We've seen many budget detail worksheets come in to us for review that don't understand how the M&A works. So you'll need to make sure that that 5% is not exceeded. It's a very important component. You are eligible to claim the M&A, and it will cover many things. So you can allocate employee salaries, travel, supplies, consultants. There's a whole list of things that you'll see in the NOFO that apply to M&A, but you cannot go past that 5%. Things that need to be in the application. Okay, so obviously the most important thing, as Mark said, is you have to have a good narrative and tell your story. You know, the core capabilities for the national preparedness system. I mean, they seem basic, but obviously these are the most important things that you need to keep in mind when you're putting your story together. Prevention, protection, mitigation, response and recovery. How do you address all those things? Why are they important to your company? How is the award going to address these issues for you and for your whole port area? We talked about the captain of the port priorities, go in a little more detail, and these are what we see in the NOFO pretty much every year. Maritime domain awareness, port resilience and recovery capabilities, training and exercises, cyber, IED and CBRN, and equipment associated with TWIC. We've seen awards for all of these priorities. The last couple of years, cyber has been a huge focus. Every cyber grant that we have written has been fully funded. For, let's say, a private facility, give you an example, one of the goals that FEMA and Coast Guard likes to see is, you know, if you have a storage facility and you have an industrial control system that controls your tanks and it's tied into your business network, well, that is a major risk and vulnerability. So you can use those cyber award funds to separate your ICS from your business network. That's just one example. We've also seen a lot of TWIC-related equipment. Now, there's been a lot of talk about TWIC and the final reader rule deadline in August of this year. We're also hearing that, and you know, this is just rumor and conjecture at this point, but we're also hearing that at some point It will not only be risk group A facilities that will be subject to TWIC, but also all other MITSA related facilities, so or regulated facilities. So just something to keep in mind, the fact that we've seen low risk facilities awarded TWIC readers, whether they be mobile or fixed, and TWIC related equipment, kind of leads us to believe that TWIC will be implemented on a larger scale at some point in the next year or two. And then Mark covered, obviously, training exercises. You know, training has traditionally been funded or applied for at a very low rate. But, you know, training should be a focus if, you know, going forward. It is something that they are looking to fund. You just need to make sure that your training programs and courses that you're trying to fund fall into the proper categories, course catalogs that are approved by the National Training and Education Division. This is in the 2017 NOFO if you want to go back and read that. Or as Mark said, if you want, or U.S. Coast Guard approved course. But if you have another training course, those are also permitted. It's a case-by-case basis where they look at that for eligibility. And if you make a valid argument, it will be granted, or has a great chance of being granted. Let's put it that way. Just going to move along a little faster here since I'm getting a little verbose. Things that need to be in the application. Okay, so a detailed budget worksheet. This is, other than the narrative, this is where most applications fail. And we see this time and time again. We'll have a customer who will come to us and say, you know, why wasn't I funded? And we will review their application and look at it. And the most telling aspect of it is that they did not include any budget detail in their worksheet. They put one line item, let's say camera system, CCTV system, $108,000. Well, there's no breakdown of any of the components. It's just one line item, and that application most likely will be dismissed in the first phase of the review process. So if you are going to apply, this is where I go back to getting accurate quotes. Make sure those quotes are broken down line item by line item, and when you put them in your budget detail worksheet, even though the worksheet itself doesn't give you a lot of space, you can create your own budget detail worksheet based on that format. A lot of times we'll just take a quote from a vendor and it may be 2 pages long, and we'll cut and paste and put that in there and expand either the sample worksheet that that FEMA provides, or just create a new worksheet. So you don't have to try to fit everything into a small space, because the more detail that you can provide, the better chance that you're going to have of getting an award. So going back to the other documentation that will be needed in the application. So what's going to happen is you're going to register in grants.gov. Assuming everything is fine, you'll fill out the SF-424. That will be in grants.gov. They've now migrated over to what they call Workspace, which is a very nice online web-based feature. Once that application is submitted, it will go to the program analyst. They will review to verify eligibility of your application. If it meets the eligibility requirements, then that application will be transferred over to ND Grants. So that, and if you go into the, again, I'll refer back to the 2017 NOFO, there are instructions in there how to register, not only for in grants.gov, so you can submit the initial application, but also you want to make sure you're prepared and have an application in ND Grants, or a registration in ND Grants. So assuming that your application is eligible and approved and transferred over, that you'll immediately be able to access it and finish your application in ND Grants for submission by the deadline. The MOUs and MOAs, if you have any MOUs and MOAs with local law enforcement, local fire, Other neighboring facilities, you want to include those. Those are very important. If you do not have an existing MOU or MOA, you can submit a blank one with your application package and make a notation in your application that you will be executing one upon the award. There may be an instance where you're applying for something, you don't have any MOUs or MOAs currently with any existing entities, but if you are awarded a particular piece of equipment such as a boat, then you would want to enter into an agreement with your local police, local fire, Coast Guard, and that. So you can put that in there. It doesn't have to be filled out, but you should include at least a blank one with your package. The other thing that you want to make sure is that you include at the end of your application, assuming it's similar to last year's, that you want to include achievable milestones. The program analysts want to see that you are able to not only state reasonable practical milestones, but they are reasonably achievable also. We've seen applications over the years where people have written that they'll have something, a major project that involves a great deal of construction. They'll have it completed in 3 months. Well, that's just not practical. And I'll go into one of the reasons why on a following slide. But you want to make sure that what you're putting in there makes sense. Triple check everything. I would say at least triple check everything. We've seen applications rejected for very minor things. So make sure you've got the captain of the port zone correct. Make sure you have your locations correct. Everything, every box that is in that IJ and in that application, make sure that it is 100% accurate. So now you've been awarded a grant. Congratulations. So what do you do? Well, as I stated earlier just now about the milestones, it's very important that you're able to meet those timelines. How do you meet those timelines? Well, depending on the size of your grant, if it's a small grant, it may be something that you yourself or someone in your organization can handle all by themselves. But some of these much larger grants that we're involved in require a grant management team. And that would include the FSO, people in operations, people in accounting, people in IT. I mean, if you're doing a TWIC project, you're going to have to involve your IT department, obviously. You're going to have to involve your operations department. You're going to have to involve electrical and engineering. So there's a team that has to be in place in order to make sure that these awards are implemented ultimately, and that that you're meeting the milestones. Now, the milestones, the fact that you don't meet a milestone doesn't mean you're going to be penalized, but the stronger the team that you have in place and the more accurate you can be with meeting your deadlines, the easier it's going to be for your award to take place, and for your program analyst to be extremely pleased with your progress. I put stop here because this is something that a lot of people are not aware of in applying for the program, and then they get an award and they're like, well, what does this EHP screening form mean? Well, the Environmental, Historic, and Preservation Screening Form is something that is required before, I say for most projects. There are a few exceptions, but for most projects, EHP is going to be required before you commit to and spend 1 penny. You cannot purchase anything. You cannot enter into any agreements or contracts until your EHP screening form is approved. So what is the EHP screening form? Well, as it says, Environmental, Historic, and Preservation, you will include pictures of the locations where your equipment will be installed. You will include pictures of any buildings that are usually within 300 to 500 feet of where equipment is being installed, so whether it's cameras or TWIC readers or a generator. And you will also have to identify and provide details on those buildings. So if you have buildings on your property that are over 45 years old, you'll have to indicate the dates of when they were built, and you'll also have to indicate any major renovations that have taken place over the years and those dates. EHP, they want as much information as they possibly can to make sure the environment or any historical significance to your facility, your port area, the surrounding area is protected. And it involves not only, they involve and look at, federal, state, local agencies who may review this. And the EHP approval can take anywhere from, I've seen it as quickly as a couple of weeks, depending on the project, and I've seen it as long as a year, depending on the project. So, you have a 3-year life cycle of these grant awards. If you don't start your EHP planning and getting that screening form filled out in, I would say, Q1 or Q2 of year 1 to start, depending on the size of the project, you could find yourself in a situation where you're entering the 3rd year and you're just getting started. So, and you know how quickly things change over the years. So, EHP is it's what I consider the most important piece of the puzzle after you get the award, because you can't do anything until you have that approval. Amendments, you are able, if let's give an example, the most common type of amendment would be a change of scope amendment. Now, the question is, let's say that you were awarded TWIC readers, and you've now redesigned your facility so that those TWIC readers and those pedestals, let's say you're going to install fixed readers, instead of at the entrance that you were originally going to have them installed, you've now reconfigured your facility, and the main gate is 500 yards away on the other side. That would require a change of scope amendment. Let's say that you have been awarded some equipment that just is not necessary right now. Let's say by the time you got the award, you had to go and purchase something that you were awarded. You could request an amendment to apply those funds to something else. There's no guarantee that the amendment will be approved, but again, it's almost like reapplying for the grant itself. If you make a great argument and you tell a great story that makes sense, you have a very good chance of getting that approved. If you can get the local Coast Guard and the captain of the port to approve or provide a letter of support for a significant change of scope amendment, you have obviously a much better chance. As far as an amendment for, let's say you're nearing the end of the 3-year cycle and you want to apply for an amendment to extend that 3 years to finish. Again, that's very risky. You don't want to be in that situation. But if you're not close to that award being implemented, you're going to have trouble getting that amendment approved. If you're in the final stages, then obviously that makes a difference. Compliance, again, extremely important. I would say, I said EHP is most important. That's in the beginning. Once you get that approval, then compliance obviously becomes extremely important to the top of the list also. Complying with the CFR for federal grants for procurement. If you look at CFR 300, you'll see that 300, I think it's 219, 319, I'm sorry. I would implore you to go through those procurement regulations and realize what you need to do in order to comply from a procurement standpoint, whether you have to put out sealed bids, whether you can get an exception to do a non-competitive bid. But when audit time comes, procurement policies and procedures are going to be very important. Reporting, generally you'll file, once you're given an award, you'll have to file what they call quarterly financial reports through the PARS system, which you'll register for. These are the SF 425 reports. They're fairly simple to fill out, but even if you have no activity, you have to file a report each quarter for each grant that you receive. The more important reports, in my opinion, are the semi-annual progress reports. These are the ones that you will detail your progress and where you are on your milestones. I would suggest that you make these as detailed as possible. We've seen them rejected for lack of detail, and the program analysts come back and ask for a significant amount of information as to where you are, because if they don't think you're making progress, that reflects poorly on your company as you're implementing these grant awards. So you want to make sure that these semi-annual progress reports are as thorough as possible and show that you are making progress. Detail dates of meetings, who attended, when you're meeting with vendors, internal meetings, obviously anything of significance. If you've got a grant management team in place and you're not gonna report every single conference call on that, but anything that shows that you are on track to meet or come close to your milestones, that is what they want to see. The audits, you will be audited. In fact, I'm preparing for audits right now. Preparation is key. A lot of the things that you're going to need to have will be your financial records. So your accounting department and your financial personnel are going to have to be heavily involved in this. If you're claiming M&A for employees, they're going to want payroll distribution reports, detailed general ledger reports for all expenditures, financial audit reports for the past 3 years, indirect costs and fringe benefit rate agreements and approvals. There's just a whole list of things that you'll need to provide in an audit. It's not that it shouldn't be overly burdensome if you have someone assigned to keeping track of this stuff, but you don't want to be in a situation where the auditor is coming out next week and then all of a sudden you've got to try to put all of this package together. That will cause you issues. And then the other thing that you want to make sure of is that you have documented policies and procedures, primarily or particularly for purchasing. That is extremely important.
So I think this is where I take over, Rob.
Feel free.
So bring this in for a landing here, and then we'll close it out and allow for some questions here. So given everything that Rob just put towards you, and there was a lot of information there, so I'm sure some people may want a copy of this. We will make this recording available. If you want a copy of the presentation, just send us an email. But just to kind of wrap it up, how do you prepare? Where do you start? Start your package now. Make sure that you've gone through and done a thorough needs assessment that will document why you need this particular thing, why you need this particular training. Make sure you've identified the gaps, either working through your state IRA assessment or whether it's through an exercise that you did in your region. Make sure those gaps are identified back to that AAR. Explore tailored solutions. You know, Admiral Allen said this best: when you've seen one port, you've seen one port. Not everything is the same. Not every cookie cutter can apply to everybody and everything. So don't be afraid to tailor the solution unique to your needs, to your gap assessment, to your needs assessment. Work your narrative. Tell the story. You've probably heard us say this 4 or 5 times during the course of this webinar. Make sure you're telling a good story. Float your concept to your Area Maritime Security Committee. If you're a little outside the box, talk amongst your peers at the committee. You'll also hear, or the captain of the port will be there to hear what your proposal looks like. The port security specialist that will help you in that area will hear it. So don't be afraid to float your concept and validate the path you want to go on. Rob made a point about a particular purchase or exercise in futility where a boat was put together and applied for, and it was denied based on the number of resources that were in that region. So rather than go down that path, float the concept through your Area Maritime Security Committee, see what their feedback is. Get the quotes today. If you want some sort of equipment or technology, get the quote today because time may be limited. It's not the time when the NOFO comes out to start asking the vendors for the quotes, because guess what? Everybody's going to be asking them for quotes, and you don't want yours to get lost in the pile. So start priming that pump now by asking for those quotations now. And don't be afraid to use external or experienced SMEs to help you through the process. As illustrated, Rob's been down this pathway a number of times. It's not his first rodeo. At the academy level, we have resources. At Oceans with Will, we have resources that are vendor agnostic, that are experienced in various types of technologies and platforms and applications. So if you want that expertise, feel free to reach out to it. Don't try to do this all by yourself. So let's bring this in for a landing. In the interest of time, we're just a little bit over. We're about 4 minutes over. But if you have specific questions, you can type them in chat. Any questions that we get during the webinar rather, that we can't answer right now due to time, we will respond back to you. I promise you that we won't let any question go unanswered. And if you would want, yes, sir.
Hi, this is Rob again. I just wanted to make one more point going back to the, I forgot to mention on the prioritizing your wish list.
Sure.
Just to give a brief example, don't just throw everything up against the wall and see what sticks. We've seen clients try to do that over the past, and what's happened is they've been partially funded for projects, and what's happened is they have not, they're not able to use the equipment. So they may submit an application for $1.3 million in equipment for, let's say, TWIC readers, fencing, lighting, gates, cameras, and everything, and they don't properly, they don't fill out a proper budget detail worksheet, or they're just asking for too much, and all they're awarded for is let's say 3 gates. Well, that doesn't help them. $70,000 in gates is not going to help you. So again, going back to being practical, because what's going to happen is you're either going to have to give that money back, or you're going to have to try to file for an amendment to use that money in some other way, which you may not be able to because you needed $1.3 million and all you got was $70,000. And we've seen this time and again over the years where people ask for way too much. That doesn't make sense. It only gets partially funded, and then they're not able to use those funds.
Good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So we got time for a couple of questions. Will, do you have any in the queue?
Hi, Mark. Absolutely. One of the first questions, and by the way, this question is meant for either yourself or for Rob. It is pertaining to the interaction with the United States Coast Guard Port Security Specialist at the sector level, and that it is absolutely critical to maintain that interaction before applying for the Port Security Grant Program. So can you expound on some strategies that might help overcome interactions with the Coast Guard or with the AMSC before that application comes through?
Sure, and I don't know if I have enough time because there's a lot of things that can go on. And I can speak to this one specifically because I was a port security specialist. I was one of the first ones hired by the Coast Guard and DHS in the aftermath of 9/11 in Miami. That was my assignment. So the comment I made about connecting with that Area Maritime Security Committee is paramount. The person that manages the meetings and schedules the meetings and sends out the emails and schedules the exercises, if it's going to be a port-wide exercise, the person that does all that work is the port security specialist. And depending on your port, obviously in big ports like Miami, New York, LA, Long Beach, there's more than one port security specialist. They divide them into different areas of responsibility. One might be dedicated primarily just to training. Another one might be dedicated just to safety. In Miami, we had one that was dedicated to the cruise industry itself. So identifying who that person is who is responsible for managing and facilitating the Area Maritime Security Committee meetings is important. Having a relationship begins at going to those meetings. If you want to know when their meeting is, you can go to their home port site, and 9 times out of 10 it's posted there, and or just reach out to that port security specialist and identify yourself and say you want to get more involved, especially if there's some committee work. And the reason why you want to get involved is now it's not just, showing up to a fire and handing out your business cards there, because you can be part of the solution and part of the response. You want to do this long before all that happens. The second part of the answer is when you want to identify and improve that relationship, a lot of times inviting that port security specialist to your particular area of work, whether you be a sheriff's department that's doing the security zone enforcement, whether you be a terminal operator, whether you be a port itself, make sure that he or she is invited out and interacts with what you're doing. Believe me, they got a lot of things on their plate. Sometimes they don't get the time to do that, and if they're invited, they feel excited about the opportunity and want to get out of the office anyway and go do something a little bit differently. So exposing them to what your world of work is and how you do it is always a good thing. And last but not least, and again, in the interest of time, trying to keep this down to a minimum here and just give you some highlights, working through the port security specialist is always 9 times out of 10, they're involved in other things other than just the Area Maritime Security Committee. They're involved in recreational boating safety. They're involved in other aspects of about what the Coast Guard does. So make sure that if you've got some other activities that you do that aren't directly related to the Port Security Grant Program, you include them in those types of discussions too, because again, they're getting to know you a little bit more. The good news about port security specialists is they're civilian positions, which means they're going to be there for a long time. It's not an assignment that's been given to an officer and that they're going to be rotating out every 3 years. So I hope I answered that, Will. I was trying to be short and to the point in the interest of time.
I'm sure you did, of course. Thanks, Mark. And Rob, perhaps this is an item for you. This is not a question. This is a comment that was submitted to us. The recommendation is, before accepting an award, if that award is for a lesser amount than what you had hoped for in the application, submit a budget modification before agreeing to the full terms of that project amount. Would you have any comment?
Well, so yeah, I mean, you have obviously the opportunity to turn down the award if and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you apply for everything that you could possibly think of, and you're only awarded a partial amount, and it doesn't make any sense. Obviously, you can either turn down the award, or you can apply for an amendment to see if you can apply those funds to something else that you may be able to utilize. So, either way, I mean, you have that option. I'm not sure if that directly answers that question, but I think that's the gist of it.
Yeah, and I want to add a little point here, Will and Rob, with regard to the amendments. We just briefly touched upon that, but I can't tell you how many times I've talked to some of the grant managers, and they are begging for people to ask for an amendment. They don't want to see the money go unused, especially if it's been awarded. And what they love applying it for is, wait for it, training. That's an easy thing to take something that's been awarded in the context of the application and applying it towards training. So if you find yourself in a situation where whether the quote isn't valid anymore for the piece of technology that you wanted, or I've seen this happen, the technology that you wanted to purchase is non-existent anymore, it's been discontinued, and you're looking for a way to amend your application and apply those funds, feel free, go put something together. And by the way, 9 times out of 10, you could just pick up the phone and call that manager, your regional manager, and just say, hey, this is where we are. This is the grant that we're working on. We'd like to amend it and take this amount that was for a type of detection equipment, and we want to apply it to training. I've not seen an application yet get denied on that premise.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. The worst thing you can do is accept an award and then not spend the money. That would be a no-no. But you can certainly apply for that amendment, and training is an excellent opportunity to change the scope.
Well, in the interest of time, we've hit 3 o'clock sharp here, and I promised you that I would get you back to your desks and your vehicles and your boats wherever you're working, so we'll try to hold to that. On the screen, I'll leave it up for a little while after we close so that you can write down phone numbers and emails if you need it. We will make this available to you. The recording will be put up on both the Oceans website and the Academy's website. And if you want the presentation itself sent to you directly, I see the email addresses there. We'll make sure you get it that way. And if there's questions that we haven't addressed, we will get back to you and make sure to respond to all of them. So with that said, I thank you all for attending, and hopefully it was something that you found informative and you can apply in your world of work. And we look forward to helping you. If you need any assistance, by all means, reach out to any one of us.
Thank you all so much.